On June 16th, Japan's stock market briefly crossed Nanaman points for the first time in history. The Nikkei was up 100% this year. Foreign investors have poured Rul-ju trillion yen, roughly $1 billion, into Japanese equities since April. Nanaman was dent.
Look at the companies leading that rally. Tokyo Electron, up in a single morning. Advantist, up 5%. Kioxia, up over 10% since its Nasen 44. Lasertec. Murata. Fanuc. If you've watched this channel, you recognize those names. They've appeared in episodes about semiconductor equipment, ceramic components, industrial robots, EU photo mask inspection. What you may not have noticed is that every single one of them traces its competitive edge to the same source.
Not technology, not government subsidies, not cheap labor, a philosophy. One that America invented, shipped to Japan in Senku Hakone and then forgot about.
In the summer of Qianzhou by Wushi, a 49-year-old American statistician named Daburu Edwards Deming boarded a plane for Tokyo. He had spent a decade trying to convince American manufacturers to adopt statistical quality control, a method of catching defects through data rather than inspecting finished products. American industry, flush with post-war dominance, wasn't interested.
Japan was a different story. The country's manufacturing sector had been reduced to rubble. Exports were a national embarrassment. The Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, known as JUSE, invited Deming to lecture. In August, Senku Hakone, at a conference center on Mount Hakone, Deming addressed Japan's most powerful industrial leaders. Historians later estimated that 90% of the men in that room controlled the majority of Japan's corporate wealth.
His message was simple: if you fix quality, costs fall, productivity rises, and you win on exports. The logic ran counter to the prevailing view that quality and cost were trade-offs. You either made things well or made them cheap. Deming said that was wrong. Quality and efficiency were the same thing, viewed from different angles.
Japan didn't just take notes. JUSE established the Deming Prize that same December, a national award for companies that achieved the highest standards of quality management. It still exists today. For decades, winning the Deming Prize was a signal to the market that a company's processes were effectively flawless.
What Deming gave Japan was a framework. What Japan did with that framework was something different. Taiichi Ono was an engineer at Toyota who spent the 1950s, 60s, and 70s systematically rethinking how a factory should work. His creation, the Toyota production system, has two pillars. The first is just-in-time manufacturing. Make only what is needed, when it is needed, in the amount needed. No buffer inventory, no hiding inefficiency behind stockpiles. The second is jidoka, a Japanese word that roughly translates to automation with a human touch. Jidoka traces directly to a much earlier Toyota invention and
the machine doesn't keep running and produce defective fabric, it stops and signals a human. Think about what that implies. A machine that stops itself when something goes wrong isn't just quality control, it's a philosophy statement. Problems are not to be worked around, they are to be surfaced, named, and eliminated.
Holding both pillars together is Kaizen, the Japanese word for continuous improvement, or more literally, change for the better. Masaki Imai's 1988 lookbook of the same name introduced the concept to Western business audiences. It became an instant bestseller, and within a few years, Kaizen entered the management lexicon in boardrooms from Chicago to London. Lean manufacturing consultants multiplied, Kaizen workshops proliferated.
And almost none of it worked, not really. According to the Kaizen Institute, most Western lean implementations fail within 18 months. Companies adopt the Kanban boards, install the Endon cords, That's the pull cord that stops a production line when a worker spots a defect, and then watch results plateau. The tools travel, the philosophy doesn't.
The reason, according to researchers who've spent decades studying Toyota's failed transplants, is that Western implementations consistently grab the visible mechanics while missing the invisible structure underneath. They focus on eliminating waste, the Japanese term is muda, while ignoring the two other ims in the original system, mura, which means unevenness, and muri, meaning overburden. Eliminate all three and you have a stable system. Fix only one and it collapses back.
More fundamentally, they miss what Ono actually believed, that problems are gifts. In most Western factories, surfacing a defect or raising an alarm is risky. It slows the line. It draws scrutiny. The incentive is to keep moving and deal with it later. TPS inverts this completely. Stopping the line to surface a problem is not an embarrassment. It is the correct behavior.
Toyota did successfully transfer this culture once, arguably, at its Georgetown, Kentucky plant, its first U.S. vehicle factory. The company spent years painstakingly building the underlying management philosophy before focusing on output metrics. Kiyoshi Furuta, the first Toyota employee at Georgetown, later wrote a book called Welcome Problems, Find Success, which describes how counterintuitive the process felt to American workers trained to hide defects rather than escalate them.
Georgetown became world-class, but it took a decade, and it required constant, patient reinforcement from Toyota's Japanese management. This brings us to the concept that actually underlies everything monozukuri.
Monozukuri, literally mono, meaning thing, and sukuri, meaning making, is usually translated as the art of making things. That translation is technically accurate and almost completely misleading. In Japan, monozukuri isn't a management technique or a corporate value. It's closer to a craft religion, the idea that the act of making something well, with precision, with care, with continuous refinement, is inherently meaningful, that a craftsman's pride is not separate from economic output but inseparable from it.
Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry codified this into the Monozukuri Promotion Act of Nissan Rokden. The legislation wasn't telling companies to pursue quality, it was trying to preserve a cultural disposition that was already there.
You can see it in the specifics. Fanuc, the industrial robotics company, runs its factories so efficiently that its operating margin regularly exceeds 80%. Closer to a software business than a manufacturer, Fanuc has over 1 million industrial robots installed worldwide, and the company treats its production tolerances with the same obsession it brings to the robots it builds. Shin-Etsu Chemical and its peer SUM Shio control roughly 20% of the global silicon wafer market.
A silicon wafer used in chip manufacturing must be flat to within a few nanometers across its entire surface. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. Achieving that consistently at scale is not a technology problem, it's a process religion.
Lasertec, which we covered in a recent episode, holds a global monopoly on photomask inspection equipment for EUV lithography, the process that makes the world's most advanced chips. The machines Lasertec builds must catch defects at scales smaller than the wavelength of visible light. The precision required isn't the product of a single engineering breakthrough, it's the accumulated result of thousands of small improvements compounded over decades.
Kaizen made visible. The broader insight is this: Japan's dominance in precision manufacturing isn't a collection of unrelated company stories. It's a single story, repeated in different industries. An American statistician gave Japan a framework in Senkyu Hakushiten. Japanese engineers embedded that framework so deeply into organizational culture that it became indistinguishable from the culture itself, and that embedding, invisible, inarticulate, transmitted through apprenticeship and daily practice rather than management manuals, is exactly what makes it impossible to simply copy.
In Nusenru, as artificial intelligence begins automating not just physical tasks but cognitive ones, there's a question worth sitting with. Digital Kaizen, AI systems that continuously optimize production processes in real time, is becoming a real category. The machines themselves are now running the improvement loops that Ono's teams ran on foot.
But here's what AI cannot automate: the disposition to stop, name a problem, and care about fixing it. That disposition isn't a software feature, it's a cultural inheritance.
If you want to keep up with stories like this, subscribe to the Japan Factor. The Nikkei just crossed nanowantain. The companies driving it are the same ones that have been refining their processes for Tisha's years. The question isn't whether they'll still be here in another Tisha's tain. The question is whether anyone else will have figured out what they're actually doing.